Hello everyone, my name is Jeffrey Lee, and welcome to Fur Trades and Human Civilizations, Episode 16. Today we'll be going over Section 4.5, which is about sugar. So as early as the primitive society period, humans experienced the taste of sweet through fruits and honey. Before the technology to extract sugar was developed, honey was the primary source of sweetness, leading to the artificial cultivation of bees. Additionally, the enzymes produced during the sprouting of plants could hydrolyze starch into sweet maltose, considered an early form of sugar. The word sugar is derived from the Sanskrit word sarkara, meaning gravel, which extended to mean ground sweetmeats of sugar. This evolved into English word sugar, the French sucre, and the German Zucker. The development of sugar in history occurred in 5 stages. The first stage is around 4000 BCE, where people in regions such as the Indus Valley in Southeast Asia began extracting juice from sugarcane and producing a thick, sweet liquid. They also cultivated sugarcane, and compared to honey and malt syrup, cane sugar appeared later but was easier to preserve and transport, becoming a primary source of sweetness. The second stage is in the 1st century CE, when India invented granulated sugar made from sugarcane juice. The third stage is when sugarcane cultivation and sugar production spread to China and the Arab world during the 2nd to 3rd century CE. Following multiple crusades, European countries began using sugar and learned about sugarcane cultivation and sugar production techniques. The fourth stage is from the 15th century onwards, when sugarcane was widely cultivated in the Americas, leading to an unprecedented sugar trade. The labor-intensive nature of sugarcane cultivation and sugar production led to the triangular trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Finally, the 5th stage is from the 19th century to the present, with the development and industrialization of beet sugar and corn syrup. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain cut off sea transport from the Caribbean to Europe, leading to a large-scale rise and popularization of beet sugar production in Prussia. High fructose corn syrup was developed in the United States by Richard O. Marshall and Earl Arcoy in 1957, improved in Japan between 1965 and 1970, and rapidly introduced into various processed food and beverages in the U.S. from 1975 to 1985. Sugarcane, the primary raw material for sugar production, primarily grows in tropical and subtropical regions. The optimal growing temperature is between 20 to 32 Celsius, requiring 6 to 8 hours of sunlight daily to promote photosynthesis and sugar accumulation. It also needs an annual rainfall of over 1,000 millimeters or equivalent irrigation. There are 2 main species of human-cultivated sugarcane: Saccharum officinarum, domesticated by the Papuans in New Guinea, and Saccharum sinus, domesticated in southern China, including Taiwan. The ancient Greeks and Romans initially learned about sugar through imported medicinal products. In the 1st century AD, a Greek physician described sugar as soluble in water and useful for treating gastrointestinal issues and relieving bladder and kidney pain. During the Middle Ages, the Arabs acquired sugar-making techniques from India, establishing sugarcane plantations and sugar factories. Sugar was mainly used by royalty and nobility to display power and wealth. Now let's talk about sugar production and trade in the Age of Exploration. Before the Middle Ages, Europeans primarily obtained sweetness from honey, maple syrup, maltose, and fruits. During the Middle Ages, sugar was produced in the East, including the Middle East, India, China, and Southeast Asia. The long distances and limited production, combined with sugar trade being monopolized by Venetian and Arab merchants, resulted in a tightly controlled supply chain and significant supply-demand imbalance. The Age of Exploration allowed European countries to acquire tropical and subtropical colonies suitable for sugarcane cultivation, and these colonies produced highly profitable sugar, boosting European production and exports and driving triangular trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Now let's talk about cane sugar. In 1420, the Portuguese began planting sugarcane and producing cane sugar on the Madeira Islands, reaping huge profits. They were the first to use African labor for sugarcane cultivation, and shortly thereafter, the Portuguese continued to plant sugarcane on the Canary Islands, the Azores, and in West Africa, continuing the practice of using forced African labor. The Portuguese also introduced sugarcane cultivation and sugar production techniques to Brazil. By 1540, there were 800 sugar mills on the island of Santa Catarina. The sugar industry in the Americas expanded significantly, with sugar mills established in the Caribbean, Brazil, Guyana, and other places. By 1550, approximately 3,000 sugar mills had been built in the Americas, creating a high demand for tools such as gears, levers, and axles, and spurring mold making and cast iron production. In 1627, Britain established the Barbados colony in the British West Indies, marking a historical turning point. Sugarcane was successfully planted in Barbados in 1641, and in 1650, Barbados exported 7,000 tons of cane sugar in a single year. In 1655, Britain captured Jamaica from Spain and began extensive sugarcane cultivation. Cuba was discovered by Columbus in 1492, but for nearly 300 years it primarily exported tobacco and beef without significant development. The British occupied Cuba between 1762 and 1763 and introduced sugarcane production. From 1770 to 1862, Cuba imported a total of 2 million laborers. After Haiti gained independence, Cuba became the world's largest sugar producer. Cuba aggressively developed its sugar industry and significantly boosted productivity by building railroads in 1845, and sugar production in Cuba increased from 200 pounds per person annually in 1760 to 1 ton per person annually in 1840. The development of Cuba's sugar industry illustrates the profound changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. With significant productivity improvements, sugar production scaled upwards and became mechanized. In the 18th century, industrial equipment such as juice extractors and boilers were introduced to American sugarcane plantations, greatly increasing sugar output. In 1800, the global sugar production was about 250,000 tons, and by 1880 it had reached 3.8 million tons. Sugar had transformed from a luxury item to a common consumer good. Statistics show that the per capita annual sugar consumption in Britain was 4 pounds in 1700, and 18 pounds in 1800, 36 pounds in 1850, and exceeded 100 pounds by the 20th century, increasing exponentially over time. So now let's talk about beet sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Sugar beets grow best in temperate regions with temperatures ranging from the 15 to 21 degrees Celsius, and the growing season is only about 100 days. In warm climates such as California, sugar beets can be grown as a winter crop, sown in late autumn and harvested in early spring, allowing for the cultivation of other crops in spring, summer, and autumn. The significant historical impact of beet sugar lies in breaking the monopoly of cane sugar, which is primarily produced by countries like Britain that has strong maritime dominance. Sugar beets allowed other European countries with high sugar demand to cultivate cheap, high-quality sugar materials domestically and produce sugar on a large scale. The successful large-scale production of beet sugar provided a favorable alternative to cane sugar in the sugar trade. This was one of the many reasons Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and subsequently abolished slavery in its homeland and old colonies by 1833. In 1575, French scientist Olivier de Serres discovered a method for preparing syrup from sugar beets. In 1747, chemist Andreas Sigismund Marggraf identified sugar in beets and devised a method to extract it using alcohol. Marggraf's extracted sugar accounted for 1.3 to 1.6% of the beet's rate, verifying the feasibility of his sugar extraction technique. The British Beet Sugar Society was established in 1832. By 1840, 5% of the world's sugar was produced from beets. By 1880, over 50% of the global sugar output was from beets. In 1899, beet sugar accounted for 2/3 of the world's sugar production, with 46% of the sugar consumed in Britain coming from beet sugar produced in Germany and Austria. From its inception, beet sugar production adopted and inherited the techniques and management practices of the Industrial Revolution in the cane sugar industry and continually evolved its cultivation and sugar production techniques. In 2005, the United States approved the cultivation of genetically modified beet varieties, which significantly increased beet yields. By 2011, approximately 95% of beet cultivation in the U.S. used these genetically modified seeds. Over 200 years, the sugar content in beets has been continually increased from 6% in 1800 to 18% in 2013, along with enhancements in single root growth, resistance to viral and fungal diseases, which improve the yield and product quality. High fructose corn syrup, or HFCS, is a sweetener made from cornstarch. After conventional cornstarch is broken down into glucose by enzymes, the corn syrup is further processed to convert part of the glucose into fructose. In the late 1950s, the Clinton Corn Processing Company in the United States developed a process to convert glucose from cornstarch into fructose, but the process was not scalable for the industrial production. Due to the U.S.'s imposing of import tariffs and sugar quotas, the cost of sugar increased. High fructose corn syrup made from government-subsidized corn was inexpensive and had a good taste. Consequently, most American food and beverage manufacturers have switched to HFCS instead of cane sugar. In 2019, the global HFCS market was valued at $5.9 billion, with an annual compound growth rate of approximately 1.62%. North America is currently the largest market for HFCS. Although a demand for HFCS in Europe is relatively low, its price competitiveness has led it to be used in certain foods and beverages. In Asian Pacific regions, HFCS consumption is growing rapidly with economic development and rising consumer demand, particularly in China, Japan, India, and Vietnam. In Japan, government policies that increased sugar prices led to the production of HFCS. Japan imports sugar from the U.S. and supervises HFCS production. HFCS, produced from inexpensive corn through advancements in biotechnology, serves as a cost-effective sugar substitute. Its significant cost advantages have substantially impacted the traditional sugar industry. Traditional cane sugar producers like Brazil, India, and Thailand are experiencing economic pressures that diversify due to reduced export revenues. From being as valuable as gold in the Middle Ages to being ubiquitous today, sweeteners have undergone remarkable transformation over the past 500 years. And now let's talk about a byproduct of cane sugar, rum. Rum is an alcoholic beverage made from the byproducts of sugarcane such as molasses or sugarcane juice through fermentation and distillation. Molasses is a thick, dark brown liquid left over after sugarcane processing. In the 16th century, as the English, French, and Spanish began cultivating sugarcane in the West Indies, they not only produced cane sugar but also used the byproduct molasses to ferment and produce an alcoholic liquid. Europeans, following the method of distilling fruit wines like grape wine to obtain brandy, distilled the alcoholic liquid from molasses to produce rum. In 1627, the British arrived on the island of Barbados and gradually developed the sugarcane industry, innovatively fermenting and distilling molasses to produce rum. Compared to imported wine and beer from Europe, rum had lower raw material costs and produced locally, eliminating the need for long transatlantic transportation and avoiding spoilage that often occurred with wine and beer during the weeks-long journey across the Atlantic. The British later invented the first cocktails that mixed sugar, lime juice, water, and rum, effectively treating scurvy. Unlike beer, which lacks vitamin C, these cocktails incorporated vitamin C-rich lime juice. In 1795, Britain mandated that the Navy drink diluted spirits with lemon and lime juice, improving the health and combat effectiveness of British sailors. Rum was also used as a trade commodity, mentioned earlier in exchanges for North American furs and African slaves. As a high-proof spirit, rum was widely accepted. Compared to beer and wine, rum was easier to preserve and had a higher alcohol content. In comparison to brandy and whiskey, rum was cheaper to produce as it was made from leftover byproducts of sugar production. The rum produced in New England was cheaper than that from the West Indies, and in some regions, a worker's daily wage could buy a week's worth of rum. The purchase of molasses by the British North American colonies indirectly supported the French sugar industry. Consequently, in 1733, Britain enacted a Molasses Act, imposing a tax of 6 pence per gallon on molasses imported from non-Britain colonies. The development of large-scale rum production and consumption in the British North American colonies also contributed significantly to the economic growth of the newly established United States. As the United States gained independence and expanded westward across the Appalachian Mountains, achieving greater agricultural productivity on vast lands. Americans stopped purchasing molasses that could not be purchased domestically and instead began widely producing and selling whiskey made from abundant grain harvests. It is worth noting that the production of beet sugar also generates molasses as a byproduct, which in an industrial setting can be used to produce alcohol, and in some parts of Europe, vodka and other spirits. Today, sugar is an ubiquitous ingredient in human diets, often taken for granted. However, its historical trajectory reveals the complex interactions and mutual influences among human societies. Behind sugar lies a vast history of cultural exchanges, geographical discoveries, and economic and trade developments spanning thousands of years. This illustrates that human civilization is a collective creation of many peoples and regions over millennia, with no single entity holding perpetual dominance. Regardless of praise or criticism, recognition or denial, the progress of human civilization continues forward in a vast flow of history. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. As always, you can purchase this book on Amazon, and if you like this series, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you next week.